In 2018, a passenger aircraft in the United States was flying when it suddenly experienced severe shaking. A pile of fog-like substance rose in the cockpit, and the two pilots instantly felt short of breath. The situation in the cabin was even worse, with passengers terrified. When the flight attendant went to check, a horrifying scene appeared before him. An arm was seen floating outside the window. Hello, this is the Undocumented channel. Today we will look at a real air disaster. On April 17, 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 was flying from New York to Dallas, carrying 144 passengers. They were unaware that an unprecedented disaster was approaching. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-7H4. The flight was piloted by First Officer Aaron Elliser, while Captain Tammie Jo Shults handled communication and checks. After reaching the cruising altitude, everything seemed smooth. However, 20 minutes later, a catastrophe struck. A loud noise erupted in the cabin, followed by a cloud of fog. Passengers were thrown into chaos, and the plane was shaking violently. The pilots were also shocked, with various warning alarms sounding. Although they were unsure of the exact issue, they deduced that the plane had depressurized and the left engine had failed, possibly due to an explosion. They felt as if all the air in their lungs had been sucked out, leaving them dizzy. Fortunately, they managed to stabilize the aircraft. However, the crisis was far from over. The plane's vibrations were intense, and the climb rate and engine RPM is suddenly dropped. If the problem wasn't resolved quickly, everyone would be doomed. The most urgent task was to find the nearest airport for an emergency landing. Both pilots donned oxygen masks, and the captain sent a distress signal to air traffic control. They were given permission to land at any nearby airport. In this emergency, they quickly decided to land at Philadelphia, about 100 kilometers away. The more experienced captain took over the controls, and although the situation in the cockpit was complex, the aircraft was still manageable. The most dangerous situation was in the cabin, where chaos reigned. Objects were flying everywhere because the cabin was rapidly losing air, and even the air in the passengers' lungs was being drawn out. The situation was made worse by the cold air rushing in from outside, causing both hypoxia and extreme cold. This is why they could see condensation forming in the high-altitude, low-pressure environment. Amid the noise and shaking, passengers hurriedly put on their oxygen masks, and the flight attendants, holding oxygen bottles, checked on each row. However, a terrifying sight awaited one of them. An arm was seen outside a window. The flight attendant was stunned, but soon realized that a female passenger in row 14 had been partially sucked out of the plane through a shattered window. Fortunately, her seatbelt prevented her from being completely pulled out. The flight attendant tried to pull her back in, but the wind resistance was too strong. Another passenger, seeing the situation, came to help. The flight attendant then called the cockpit and informed the pilots, who were also shocked. The immediate priority was to pull the passenger back into the cabin, as she would either freeze or suffocate. The experienced captain quickly devised a plan: reduce the airspeed to decrease the wind resistance. After reducing the speed to 210 knots, the passenger was finally pulled back into the seat. However, she had already lost consciousness due to the cold and lack of oxygen. Others immediately started CPR, and the captain raced against time to land the plane and hand her over to ground medical personnel. To save time, the captain decided to use a flap configuration of 5 degrees, which would reduce drag and increase speed, making the aircraft easier to handle. Although the first officer felt this was risky, the captain had the final say. The first officer trusted and assisted the captain. The flight attendants, enduring the turbulence, demonstrated the brace position to the passengers preparing for the emergency landing. With the pilot's experience and calm handling, the plane finally landed safely. All 148 people survived, except for the passenger, who was partially sucked out and later died despite resuscitation efforts. The deceased passenger was Jennifer Reardon, a vice president at Wells Fargo. Afterward, the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) launched an investigation and found that the main engine near the 14th row had exploded. Was the explosion caused by a fire? No, as there were no traces of soot in the engine, ruling out a fire. Further inspection revealed the culprit: a fan blade in the engine. The fan disc, located at the front of the engine, is a critical component, and 90% of the engine's thrust comes from the fan blades. One of the 24 blades had broken off, puncturing the window. Experts found fatigue cracks, known as beach marks, on the remaining blades, indicating that the blade failure was inevitable. Why hadn't this been detected during routine maintenance? The usual method, dye-penetrant inspection, was used, but it failed to detect the cracks. A more effective method, ultrasonic testing, had been available since 2012 but was not adopted by Southwest Airlines. Following the accident, ultrasonic testing became standard. The NTSB also required Boeing to redesign the engine cowling to prevent similar. Thus, Southwest Airlines and Boeing were primarily responsible for the accident. However, the crew's common professional response, leading to a successful emergency landing, was commendable. Captain Tammie Jo Shults, First Officer Aaron Elliser, and the other crew members, along with passenger and Renee Dunn, were later honored by President Donald Trump. Each of them truly deserved the title of hero. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time.